to the outdoor gardens and some really lovely settings. This is one that a lot of photographers select. Obviously, all kinds of plants. As John was saying, the gardens weren't started by Larry Mellichamp. They were actually started by Herbert Heckenblichner back in 1966. Larry Mellichamp was an undergraduate student at that time, and Larry actually helped plant some of the first plantings, but he's not the guy who actually started the gardens. Now, one of the things, in my position, I've met a tremendous number of plants people in my life, huge number. There are two that stand out above everybody else. First is Mike Durr. Mike Durr was my major advisor at University of Georgia, absolutely incredible plantsman. Second person is Larry Mellichamp, my predecessor at UNC Charlotte. And the plants out here at UNC Charlotte, we have some true, rare, and unique specimens. So I hope you come out to visit us. This, by the way, is the native terrace named after him, the Mellichamp Native Terrace. All kinds of beautiful, beautiful things. And when we see these beautiful things, do y'all, and by the way, I just want you all to know as I begin this talk that I plan on offending absolutely everybody in this room at one point. Do y'all know who this is? No, you don't? Really? Well, good. I'm glad you don't know who it is, and I'm glad nobody made something up, because that would have been really embarrassing, because this is something I actually just found yesterday. This is an AI-generated image of the most attractive man in Iceland. Why Iceland? I don't know. There was this thing on the news, AI-generated images of most attractive males all across the world. So I just picked one more or less randomly. And I have to tell you, though, when you pick a plant in your garden, is this kind of what you do? I'm just asking. Now, who's this? Kelsey, very good. Travis Kelsey. What can you tell me about him? He dates Taylor Swift. I think that's a good start. What else? Won the Super Bowl. What position does he play? Yeah. Tight end. Who's his brother? And guys, I'm from Philadelphia. This is a big deal. Who's his brother? Jason Kelsey. Yes. Look at how much you know about this guy. For your garden, which do you want? That guy or that guy? I'm just asking. It's up to you. But I know who I want in my garden. Now, one thing I think that we have to remember, she thought there'd be nothing but pictures of plants. Come on, guys. There's a lot more out there in the garden than just plants. When we are out there in our gardens, we don't think about it too much. But nowadays, we don't need to garden. I mean, if you want to sit in your living room all day, some people do it. You can do that. You don't have to grow food anymore. You can get it from elsewhere. In fact, it's embarrassing, or maybe I shouldn't say embarrassing. In fact, I find it difficult to comprehend the number of people that come through the garden, especially children, who have absolutely no idea that a peanut, for example, is a seed. It blows their mind. A 10-year-old should really know that in my mind, but a lot of 10-year-olds don't realize that. We don't realize it, that as we're in the garden, we're competing with other pastimes. Pastimes like this, right here. We are competing with baseball. We're competing with football. We're competing with Travis Kelsey. That's tough. We're actually competing with other pastimes. We're competing with Netflix, Showtime, HBO Max, YouTube. We're competing with all these things. And because we're competing with these things, we need to start to think in a different way. Okay? We need to start thinking about some depth in our gardening and in our plants. Now, the other day, just for fun, I started going through houses in North Carolina, mostly around the Charlotte area. There's actually one up here that's close to this area, within a 20-mile radius. I can't remember which one, but I remember. I started price ranges, and I started looking at the landscaping. At $80,000, you get grass, well, more or less grass, and you get a square meatball of something. I don't even know what that is. for 290,000, you get some trees, birch, some grass, and some other, not meatballs, I don't know, phallic things. 1.5 million grass and more oddly shaped meatballs. You know how easy it was to find this? It took only 10 minutes. I was all expecting to take hours finding these things. This is just what pops up. Another 1.5 million grass and meatballs. 3.1 million grass and meatballs and a tree. 7.5 million grass and meatballs. Doesn't that blow your mind that people have that little interest in their lawns and in their yards? And the thing is, the stuff that's in the lawn and in the yard is in and of itself fascinating, I think. I mean, what is the history of, for example, everybody's favorite grass, Kentucky blue? What do you guys know about Kentucky bluegrass? It's from Kentucky. I wanted you to say that because it's not from Kentucky. And I'm loading this question in case you were wondering, is Kentucky bluegrass native? No, where's it from? England, Europe. I should say Eurasia. Kentucky bluegrass actually is from Eurasia. It's actually known in the United States, in the Midwest, Kansas, for example, it's actually registered as an invasive. Why is it called Kentucky bluegrass? Well, it actually can be a good grazing grass, and they grow it in Kentucky for grazing way back when in the 1800s, and you'd look out on your fields and they'd appear bluish, so Kentucky bluegrass. But it is not from Kentucky. It is not native. If you have a lawn full of Kentucky bluegrass, how often do you have to apply chemicals like 2,4-D and the others to clear everything out so that the bluegrass can live here in Charlotte, or not here in Charlotte, here in North Carolina? 2 to 3 times a year to keep it clear. If you talk to the chemical companies, it's more like 5 times a year, but we won't talk to them today. Kentucky bluegrass actually is not a wonderful competitor here, so we need to do a lot to keep our Kentucky bluegrass healthy. How many times do we have to fertilize it? 3 times a year. This is awesome. The chemical companies have got to be so happy about this. And check it out. With this Kentucky blue, of course, this is, my lawn because I don't use this stuff. What's that with it? Clover. And where's clover from? Here? Well, clover's from, they actually are, you're right. Clover is actually also European. There is native clover, but you'll find it all over the world. The low-growing clover, most of it is from Europe. Up until the 1950s, when you bought grass, clover was in it. Why was clover in it? Because clover is a legume, catches nitrogen from the air. And then when you cut your grass, or your clover as well, when you cut that, that's actually what fertilizes your grass. And you don't need to add extra nitrogen. What a great idea. Which, of course, is why all the HOAs don't want us to use clover, I guess, because the HOAs are paid off by the chemical companies. Actually, I don't know. But it does make sense. Too much sense. Conspiracy theory. The point is that we've become accustomed to planting yards full of something that was actually once sustainable. When we planted Kentucky bluegrass and clover together, that was actually relatively sustainable. We've been somehow shifted into planting nothing but, or maintaining nothing but Kentucky bluegrass, which needs this constant attention. And by the way, I think that in and of itself is fascinating. Why do people not know this? Why are they happy to just go out and spend literally hundreds of dollars a year on fertilizers and pesticides? I don't have an answer for that. I'm actually asking it because it actually blows my mind that people are willing to do that instead of planting a little bit of clover in their yards. It also blows my mind that this is considered a weed in our yards. You guys know what this is, of course, right? Sumac? No, not sumac. There is some sumac there on the lower right-hand side, but the one with the berries. What's the one with the berries? Pokeweed, fantastic. And what is pokeweed amazing? Well, first of all, pokeweed is native or exotic? Native, exactly. It's native, and what can it be used for? I'm going to start with birds because this is one of the best foods for birds out there. Would an HOA allow it in your yard? And yet, ecologically, well, which do you think is better? Kentucky bluegrass or pokeweed? Right. So it's fantastic for birds. Cedar waxwings love it. Robins love it. What else is it good for? Poke salad. Now, it's extremely toxic. I do want to point out, this is a very toxic plant. But if you boil the leaves multiple times, it takes a little bit of cooking. You can make poke salad out of it. And once upon a time, it would make two dyes, made a yellow dye and a purple dye out of the berries, yellow dye out of the leaves. There's a wonderful story behind this plant. This plant belongs in our landscapes. Why are we getting rid of it? This, one of my very favorites. Now, you'll be more familiar with it in its green meatball form. You guys know this one? This is a native used around many, many houses. Not boxwood, not boxwood. Ilex glabra, no, but that's a very good guess. Ilex vomitoria, yes. And what do you guys know about Ilex vomitoria? Best stories out there. No? Let me tell you about Ilex vomitoria. First of all, it is, well, let me start from a different place. How many of you know yerba mate? Yeah, you've had it? Do you like it? Fantastic. Tell me what it is, just real quickly. It's a drink. It's a drink. And do you like it? It gives you a little bit of a buzz? Fantastic. I do too. It's from South America. It is also from a holly, and it's made from a holly leaf that's from South America. Its closest relative is Ilex vomitoria. Ilex vomitoria is the North American source of caffeine. It is also the North American source of theobromine. What is theobromine? Theobromine is, well, ask this. Does chocolate make you happy? Theobromine is the reason chocolate makes you happy. Ilex vomitoria is one of the few plants that has both caffeine and theobromine in it. It makes the most amazing tea that I drink instead of yerba mate, although I also have yerba mate. Why don't you know about it? You don't know about it. This is part of the wonderful story. You don't know about it because, first of all, well, it's mostly the East India Company. You know, the East India Company did all the tea trade, or I should say monopolized the tea trade. Well, when they were doing the tea trade, they did two things. First of all, they banned its import into the UK. And after they banned its import into the UK, when people were handing out Latin names, an East India Company employee decided to name this. And what did they creatively name it? Ilex vomitoria. To be honest, there's some truth behind it. There were Native American groups that did utilize this, and there was a ritual where they would actually drink 3 gallons of this after fasting for 5 days. It would give them quite the caffeine high, and they would vomit. And I would vomit if that was water. Just saying. So, what a neat story. Did you guys know that? But what a great way to connect people with plants. Why don't we know this about a plant that is, I would say, in fully 25% of yards in the urban areas around, in suburban areas in North Carolina? Maybe I think if I said 25%, I don't think I'd be that far off, especially if we included either the shrubbier form or the more meatballish form. Okay. But as people learn about plants, they get more excited about. This, by the way, is a group of students, art students at the UNC Charlotte Botanical Gardens, drawing things. Of course, they get inspired out there, as most of us get inspired by plants. I get inspired by plants. You guys probably wouldn't be here if you didn't get inspired by plants. And you get bored of the green meatballs, you get bored of the grass. You're looking for adventure. You're looking for romance, mystery, and excitement of the out of the ordinary. And most people are looking for things that just look nice. And don't get me wrong, every plant has a story. Every plant has a story. But I'll admit that some are prettier than others. Here are two of my favorites, very romantic plants. You guys know this one? Okay, so this is Cornus Florida Pringlei. This is Pringle dogwood. So it's actually a dogwood. Those are bracts, not actually petals. That's actually from Central America, so it's not native to this area, but it can grow in this area. Amazing, amazing tree. And this thing's in bloom, just dropped dead. You guys know this one? It's a rare plant. Oconee bells. Heard of Oconee bells? Okay, it's a spring ephemeral. Not common around here. We have a few stands at the UNC Charlotte Gardens. If you want to see them down there, you need to go down pretty soon. They haven't started blooming yet. They will start blooming soon, though. And of course, things like big leaf magnolia. Where's big leaf magnolia from? Do you know? Japan? No. Where's big leaf magnolia from? Okay, let me tell you. It was a European first saw this plant. You guys heard of Michaud? Michaud's a big plant explorer. He first saw this plant in Gaston County, if you guys know Gaston County. Okay. So North Carolina was where it was actually first seen. It is a native, and it is the largest flower in North America. Now, so far what I've shown you are just kind of, I shouldn't say normal plants, not normal plants. They're obviously somewhat unusual. But let's just say people haven't messed with them a whole lot. As people really get into gardening, they start to look at plants that are a little bit more extreme, like this right here. Do you guys know what this is? Camellia, very good. And the plant part, what is that? Why is it that people like to look at plants' privates so much? Why is that? And not only do they like to look at plants' privates, but they like to look at mutated plant privates. Do you ever think of that? Did you ever realize that? This plant, this is what we call a double. What does a double mean? What does a double mean? I like this. More petals. Yes, but those more petals come at the expense of something. What do they come at the expense of? What if I said, this is not only mutated, this and this are castrated. Mutated and castrated. A double plant, a double flower, is one where the male parts of the flower have been mutated to form petals. Wow, that's wild. Did you know that? When you plant that in your yard, you got all excited about this pretty plant, but what did you plant in your yard? You planted something that has no pollen because it has no male parts. If it has no pollen, it has no extra protein for your predators. This is actually a very, very big deal. Why is this a big deal? Because you don't realize it, but lady beetles, for example, yes, they eat aphids, but they run out of aphids, in the wild anyway. And when they run out of aphids, they need a secondary food source, high in protein. What is their secondary food source? Pollen. What did you just take away? Pollen. So when you plant a whole lot of doubles in your yard, I'm not telling you they're not beautiful, but I am telling you that ecologically you've done something that's kind of iffy. What else have you removed? And this is less obvious and isn't always true. Nectar. Nectar is often produced at the base of the stamens. When you create a double, frequently, not always, I don't want to say always, don't want to go too far, there's less nectar. Okay? So you might think that, with all these extra petals, you're actually bringing in more insects because it's more beautiful. Nah, I mean, maybe it is more beautiful, but they can't smell, or they can't get as much nectar, which is another type of food. They can't get this protein. In the wild, and this is an obvious question, in the wild, does this plant survive? These are all natural mutations that we've seen so far. These are all natural mutations, but does this plant live in the wild? No, it does not, because it can't reproduce. So what we've decided to do, because we think it's pretty, we keep it going. We have found a sick plant and we've decided that it's awesome, and we have artificially kept it going, and now sick plants dominate the garden because, yay, sick plants, it's pretty. So, castrated, mutated, and in the case of one given to your sweetheart, amputated. What a gift. An amputated, castrated, mutated sex organ. Here you go. Anyway, and roses have been so overbred, as you guys probably realize, that the fragrance on most of these doubles is far inferior to what you find in the garden. It's hard to find a single rose anymore. I personally still love the single roses. And, I'm not going to deny that I have a double in my garden, but do you want your garden to be dominated by doubles? It's not a question for me. It's a question for you that you have to answer in your own mind and your own conscience. And I will say this also. I said that most of your doubles are naturally occurring. In the case of baby's breath, they couldn't find a natural double, so they just shot it full of radiation. And now they have doubles that were created by shooting it full of gamma rays, just like the Hulk. It's awesome. Now, the next one that you'll find in the garden that people flock to is the variegated plants, or are the variegated plants. And I know that you guys don't have variegated bananas, but we do at the UNC Charlotte Botanical Garden. So I thought I'd show you variegated bananas. Right here, the bananas themselves, you can see, are actually striped. The leaves are striped. It's actually pretty awesome. Looks pretty cool. But let me ask you a question. We'll go to the next slide. You guys familiar with this particular red bud? Caroline Sweetheart? Yeah. I'm not going to deny that's gorgeous. I won't. I will tell you that I'm not fond of most variegated plants, but this particular one, I have to admit that I do like. But let me ask you guys a question. This is from a natural mutation. It's another mutated plant. In the wild, does this plant live? Is this a healthy plant? What do you think? Right, it's not a healthy plant because it's lacking chlorophyll, and this lack of chlorophyll makes it less able to photosynthesize than a plant that is packed with chlorophyll. Variegation is a tough one to talk about. I can actually spend about 2 hours, and I do spend 2 hours in my regular classes talking about variegation. So I'm not going to go into this too much in depth, but let me just say that almost all of the time, not all the time, variegation is a sure path to, I won't say death, but poor ability to compete. And yet, this is what we want in our yards. We want doubles that can't photosynthesize properly. And maybe we're into fruit trees too, that we actually have to prop up because we want dwarf apples. Actually, all of our apples that you buy today are dwarfs. They do this so that they're easier to pick. There are a variety of reasons why we plant dwarf apples, but apples are typically relatively tall trees. When we dwarf them, they are not as able to compete, but we value this, so we value the dwarf plants. And then the one that I will never understand, as long as I live, is the mutation that causes fastigate plants. Why? I mean, I talk to a lot of landscape designers in my job, and they tell me that this is a vertical element. I tell them that this is a big phallus. That's just the way I see it. Why do we love plants like this? This plant is also inhibited in its growth. Because of its vertical structure, it is not able to take in the sun's rays normally. It isn't spread. It can't absorb an appropriate number of sun's rays. This is a plant that dies in the wild. But we like it. We like phallic plants without male parts that can't feed themselves. Why is that? I don't understand it. But now, don't you feel empowered when you walk into your neighbor's yard to tell them exactly what they have? So you've seen this and you said, well, I'm going to go native. And this is just something I pulled off of Facebook the other day. This top part is, it's true, by the way. Skippers were once not considered butterflies or moths. They're now considered butterflies, but there was a time they weren't. Don't worry about that. It doesn't matter. This bottom part, to help skippers grow plants that are native to your area and avoid pesticides. The avoid pesticides I am all about. You absolutely should avoid them as much as you can. But the native part, the blanket statement bothers me, and I think will always bother me. John made the point at the beginning of this show that the UNC Charlotte Botanical Gardens is very strong on natives. We are very strong on natives. I do love native plants. I do promote native plants. One thing you will never call me is a native plant zealot. Something that people do not seem to realize, and by people I mean a certain group of people, which drives me absolutely batty, is that defining native is very, very difficult, if not impossible. Is ginkgo native? Easy question. Is ginkgo native? And you know that you're wrong, right? You know that you're wrong when you say no. Because 1 million years ago, ginkgos grew here. And if they grew here 1 million years ago, then returning them to this area, they're native. Wouldn't you agree with me? Or would you not agree with me? I don't know. I'm going to show you slides, or a few slides. In a few slides, I'll show you some plants that have been here for hundreds and hundreds of years, but they haven't been here for thousands of years. So should they be considered native? Okay, maybe we should pick a time period. 300 years? Does 300 years work for you for native? No, 300 years doesn't work. 500, does 500 years work? Sure, 500, so from the 1500s, so peach tree'd be native. Okay, you can. 15,000 years. If it's here 15,000 years, you guys are good with that it's native? I see people nodding. You guys realize that 15,000 years ago was the Ice Age and it was permafrost right here. What's native? Drives me insane. What we should be asking is, what is the ecological function that we want the plant here for? If we have a double flower, we know what the answer to that is. Let's skip that. This is a white oak. White oaks are known as amazing sources of food for caterpillars, Lepidopterous larvae. Okay. White oaks are amazing plants to put in your yard. They're going to feed a lot of caterpillars. And by feeding a lot of caterpillars, in turn, you're going to be feeding a lot of birds. Okay, I love the white oak. I have no problem with it at all. But I want to make the point that I love that native and I promote that native, but I didn't need that native to fill that ecological niche. I could have filled it with Quercus robur, or English oak, which feeds almost exactly the same group of caterpillars, including all the native caterpillars. In fact, there are certain native caterpillars that really, really made out when Europeans started moving plants here. Let me name one. The peach tree borer. Oh, yes, it's a terrible pest. But the peach tree borer is a completely native butterfly which infests peach trees and really, really did well when it came over here. If any of you know Talamy, I'd love to talk about some of the things that Talamy says, which are completely wrong. So if any of you would like to talk about that, I'm not going to take time now, but if any of you want to talk about it after the talk, I would love to tell you about that, because some of the stuff that he says is actually based on research, which is just insane. Doug Talamy wrote the book Bringing Nature Home, which promotes native plants. Everything I'm saying so far is good. The problem is that some of the research that he goes through is, let's just say, it is manufactured. And that's the nicest way that I can put it. All right. Another one. I just talked about peach. Peach is an amazing plant for all kinds of native insects. But so are native plants, of course. For example, y'all are familiar with our native cherries, okay? Prunus, the genus Prunus. One thing I am going to say about Talamy that's very positive, he actually goes through and names group of genera which are very attractive to various Lepidopterous larvae, caterpillars. Prunus, and it doesn't matter if the prunus is native or if it is exotic, at least for the most part. Malus being the apples. Prunus, I should have said, prunus is peaches, cherries, almonds, apricots, thank you, plums. So prunus includes a lot of different plants. Malus is your crab apples, also includes your introduced apples, which mostly came from actually in and around what was the USSR, just to give you a bigger picture. Third one would be Quercus, which is your oaks. And fourth one would be Acer, although Acer being your maples, although I do want to point out one maple really quickly that does not do a great job of feeding insects, and that's Norway maple. Norway maple, I have to say, it is an exotic and it's bad for feeding insects. You wouldn't want to plant a Norway maple if you were interested in feeding insects. All right, and then I want to point out, and this is what really bugs me, the idea that simply planting native is going to provide a good source of food for your Lepidopterous larvae is insane. And the reason is because there are a whole lot of plants, such as this anise, which, look, if I wanted to plant a yard that fed no insects, I could plant entirely native and do that. You guys are familiar with Alyssum parviflorum, Alyssum floridanum, anise trees, native anise. Native anise is full of, just to let you guys know exactly what it's full of, linalool and limonene. These are actually commercial insecticides. So they're actually full of commercial insecticides. Guess what? Insects don't eat them. What a surprise. On top of that, I could plant some Itea. You guys are familiar with that. Sweet spire. Sweet spire feeds like one caterpillar species, like literally one. And I could plant a whole lot of, you guys know this one, Calycanthus, Florida sweet shrub. This is, I'm just, by the way, showing you guys my absolute favorite plant ever. This is the cultivar Athens. How many of you are familiar with this plant at all? Only a few of you. Oh, guys, this is an amazing plant. The fragrance is like, and I mean this in the best way possible, like an overripe melon. Just amazing. But the fragrance is very short-lived. In Athens, with the green flowers, the fragrance is lasting, which makes it just an amazing choice. It's a little bit of a leggy shrub. It is not a green meatball, but if you're into interesting plants, this is one that you need for your yard. It is absolutely incredible. And it gets almost no insect pests. Again, if I wanted to build a sterile yard being one where I don't have any insects growing anywhere, I would add some Calycanthus to my Itea and my Alyssum. And I would have a yard where there were practically no caterpillars and no birds to come feed on them. And I can do it all native. Simply planting native is not enough. You actually have to think about what you want to do. And if you want to plant exotic, You can. You make your garden meaningful through your knowledge and understanding of the plants you install. What I'm trying to do this whole time is to point out that there are stories behind everything that you have in your yard. We are competing with baseball and football. And to do that, we need to know something about what we're planting. Being pretty is not enough. We do not want to be the pretty guy from Iceland. We want to be Travis Kelce. Now, thought I'd show you just a few of my favorite plants with wonderful stories. You guys know this one? This is the maypop. The reason I love them, this is maypop, also known as a type of passion flower or passiflora. It is a native. I love watching little bees get in there and get the pollen all over themselves. It's called the passion flower because the first passion flowers were actually found in South America when they're found by Europeans. The Europeans, mostly missionaries, Catholics. Of course, the first thing that they wanted to do was to name the flower after the Passion of Christ. So it's actually named after the Passion of the Christ. It has something to do with the number of different parts on the flower. I cannot tell you exactly what, but if you're interested in that, it might be worth looking up because all kinds of numeric gymnastics to make it, be the Passion of the Christ. It produces these fruits. And if you wait for these, you don't ever pick these off the vine. But if you wait for them to drop, these are the tastiest passion fruit that you have ever had in your life. And I say that I've spent time in Colombia and eaten all the other types of passion fruits. And of all of them, our native passion fruit I consider the absolute best. It's a vining plant, will go great on a fence, and just a fascinating, fascinating plant that you can also eat. Have any of you tried this? None of you have tried this? I have not had it. I have not had the birds get this, but part of the reason I haven't had the birds get this is because we have some muscadines planted right next door, and they really go after the muscadines. And I won't say ignore this, but they mostly leave this alone in favor of the muscadines. Now, we've had the muscadines there for 4 years, and in that 4 years, despite multiple efforts, I've probably eaten a total of 2 muscadines off of those vines. So there you go. Plant some muscadines with your maypops. Oh, and why are they called maypops? Do you guys know? Because when you step on them, when they're unripe, when you step on them, those little fruits are actually full of air, and they actually pop. So it's kind of neat. That's why they're called maypops. You guys know this one? Little brown jug. It's a native ginger, which you can actually eat. They're supposed to be, if you look at the literature, it says they're ant pollinated. We now know they're mostly not ant pollinated. We actually know that what happens now is they mostly pollinate themselves. Okay, but you will see ants in and around them. And the flavor is ginger. However, they have an extra protein, so if you eat too much of it, it'll actually make you sick to your stomach. Still, really, really cool understory plant. For a shady ground cover, there are not much better than your little brown jug. My personal favorite. I told you guys where I'm from, right? Philly, good. Anybody else here from Philly? Nobody? Well, there's a drink in Philly. You guys may recognize it. There's a certain drink in Philadelphia, soft drink, which I absolutely love. In fact, it's my favorite drink in the whole wide world. It's called birch beer. You know birch beer? Well, it comes from sweet birch. Sweet birch, this plant right here, and when you scratch that stem, it is so incredibly fragrant. It just takes me back to being a kid and eating birch beer and cheesesteaks, which is mostly what I tried to eat as a kid. Mostly didn't get away with it, but it's what I tried to eat. This plant has so much wintergreen in it. The primary oil in it is oil of wintergreen, that they would actually use this plant for wintergreen, oil of wintergreen extractions for, those crazy medicines that you hear about in the 1800s. So it was actually used for oil extraction. And then, of course, the rhododendron. Everybody knows the rhododendron, but what do you know about the rhododendron? See, that's the thing. You got to know about these things. This thing is toxic, really, really toxic, which is awesome. And the reason it's awesome is because this plant isn't just toxic in its leaves, its flowers, its stems, its roots. It's also toxic somewhere a plant is almost never toxic. It's nectar. Its nectar's toxic. So what does that mean when bees come and take that nectar and make it into honey? What does that make the honey? Toxic. No, not toxic, hallucinogenic. And it's called mad honey. Most of our mad honey comes out of Turkey. You can buy it. And it's interesting. It's fun working at a university. I told this story to one of my friends in the English department, he's an Irish scholar, and he makes, I shouldn't say yearly, but at least once every 2 years, he goes to Ireland and does research. And I told him about this, and he was like, that's really, really interesting. He starts looking through ship manifests because he's curious. And guess what he finds? He finds a shipment of mad honey from Turkey to Ireland for the purpose of stirring into their beer. Yes, it's also true for Kalmia, that is to say mountain laurel. So azaleas, Kalmia, rhododendrons. Now, I'm going to go a little bit deeper than you guys probably want to know. But here in the United States, North America, our rhododendrons do have this toxin in them. It's in all your rhododendrons. But mostly honey like we think of it isn't made because it's mostly solitary bees that go to these plants. Believe it or not, you guys know they're honeybees, but you may not realize there are many subspecies of honeybees. Okay? There's only one subspecies of honeybee that will actually make honey out of this type of flower. There's no reason for you to know that except curiosity, and that is Apis mellifera. The subspecies is caucasica. For those of you who know your geography, Caucasica, the Caucasus is in not too far from Turkey, where they would make mad honey. So is Caucasica in the United States? Yes, it is. In fact, it was in the United States back during the Civil War. There are records of Union soldiers up in the North Carolina mountains getting high off of mad honey. So there you have it. We've had it here too. You know, the sunflower, obviously a gorgeous plant, but what do we really know about it besides that it is pretty? In the United States, 98% of our cropland is in exotic plants from somewhere else. 2%, that 2% is filled with things like blueberries, cranberries, and even maple trees for maple syrup. Worldwide, there is only one North American crop that has had any real success, and that is the sunflower for oil. Okay? People don't realize this, but North American crops, by and large, are not popular, the exception being sunflower. Peach tree. Of course, the peach, to me, is one of the most interesting plants because in terms of a resource for native insects, it is one of the best, just one of the absolute best. This particular tree is one that makes me really, really happy for a variety of reasons. But it was named after somebody at the university, which I like. But it's the Alberta peach. Have you guys heard of the Alberta peach? Yeah. What do you know about the Alberta peach? No, but you're close, but you're not quite there. It's not the seed. It's not the seed. It's a harder peach. You see, peaches are tough to ship. They're soft. Peach production up until the early 1900s was actually up where I'm from, in the Philadelphia area. Delaware, Jersey. That's actually where peaches, the latitude they come from is up there. Down here, they actually get all kinds of diseases that they would never get further north. We'll leave that alone for now. But the thing is that they could actually grow peaches pretty well down here in the red clay. Peaches actually grow great in the red clay. So when the land was torn apart by cotton and tobacco, peaches actually did really well. But the thing is that shipping peaches was a problem. So what happened is that this guy named Samuel Rumpf discovered a peach that was harder than any other peach. So he could ship it. So the Alberta peach is an important peach because you could actually ship it from here up north. That is the reason that peaches became such a big crop down here, was the fact that the Alberta peach was a harder peach that could be shipped. Something else about Samuel Rumpf. Not only did he discover the Alberta peach, by the way, named after his wife, he also invented the refrigerated rail car. So between the refrigerated rail car and the harder peach, made himself a little fortune, as you can imagine. Sweet potatoes. Do we have anybody here who is anti-GMO? Okay, anti-genetically modified organisms. You can be, you can't be. But I do want you to understand something. The way that plants are genetically modified is that we actually take a disease and we put a little bit of DNA into it, and then that disease infects a plant and it puts the disease, or it puts the DNA into that plant. That's basically the way it works. We take a disease. The thing is that people don't realize is that this has happened in nature many, many times. With sweet potato, it happened about 5,000 years ago. If you're anti-GMO, if you test any sweet potato, it will test as genetically modified because the sweet potato was naturally genetically modified. In other words, that parasite, that disease, actually took a piece of DNA from something completely different and shot it into the sweet potato, resulting in a larger tuber. We don't know exactly how that happened, but that happened. If you are anti-GMO, you should not ever eat a sweet potato because there's literally no sweet potato that has not been genetically modified. Now, you can say that it was natural, but it was done in exactly the way that we do it right now. So, just saying. All right, and I'll close up the talk with a shot up into the leaves of a big leaf magnolia because that is one of my favorite views in the garden. So I'm going to stop there and ask if you all have any questions. Thanks. Yes.
So for your ideal lawn, what would be the mix and what would be the value?
So I like the micro clovers. There are a whole lot of different types. I can't tell you an exact one. I personally just let them come in naturally. In terms of, it's nice to have a native grass if you can. St. Augustine is one that I don't know if it'll do here. It barely does in Charlotte, but we can do St. Augustine there. It's a warm season rather than a cool season grass. And if I'm going with a cool season grass, I'm probably going with a tall fescue. My preference is to minimize lawn as much as we can. I think that one thing, what should be asked is, what do you actually do to your lawn? Let's pretend you asked that. What do you actually do to your lawn? Because I got my lawn, it was actually perfectly Kentucky blue. Basically, I left my lawn alone. I hit it with 2,4-D once every 3 to 5 years. I do, keep some of the stuff back. I do have an HOA that complains to me sometimes. So I hit about once every 3 to 5 years just to keep things in check. The clover tends to tolerate that. And I definitely encourage clover. And the only thing I allow henbit. I allow a whole lot of different weeds I allow purslane. The only thing that I really fight are certain thistles, because you step on them in your barefoot and that really hurts. Other than that, I encourage almost everything. As a kid, I used to eat clover heads and I still do. They're really tasty. All right. Anything else? No? Y'all are an easy crowd. I like that. Yes.
corn is being to the settlers by the
By the Native Americans. Yeah, no, corn is not native. Corn was actually moved by Native Americans up from Central America. So, I mean, if you want to think of it as all of the Americas as native, then you can, and I won't fight you on that, but it's typically thought of as not native because it was introduced, we actually, based on our best guesses right now, corn was actually not in the Americas until about 2,000 years ago. So it was that recent. People don't realize that it was that recent. You hear of the Three Sisters? The Three Sisters it was incredibly recent. Three Sisters being squash, corn, and beans. That's incredibly recent, comparatively speaking. 5,000, 3,000 years ago, that was not a thing. They were using different crops. A lot of lamb's quarter was actually used. Yeah. Okay. Anything else? I thought y'all were gonna ask me how to make mad honey, but that's good. That's good. I'm glad y'all avoided that one. All right. Well, then thank you all very much, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Jeff. And I will say that Calycanthus Athens is in our spring plant sale. There's only so many of them. And remember, if you're a friend of the gardens, you get to pre-order. So, you know, we don't want any brawls breaking out in the middle of the plant sale. It gets ugly sometimes. But thank you, Jeff. Those, you know, it's the stories about plants. It's about diving into the actual science behind plants that I often tell people, sometimes the story is better than the plant. Unfortunately, sometimes it's that's true. More often the case, but it was just fantastic talk, and thank you all for coming out, and we'll see you next week if you want to learn about roses, and then definitely do not miss Brent Heath. That is, you know, a rare opportunity to get Brent down here, and you will learn more about bulbs than you ever dreamed about. So thank you.